The night had settled over the city, and the luxurious auction hall was now silent and dark, with only a few staff members cleaning up the space. Victoria Hayes stepped out of the venue, holding a small ornate wooden box in her hand. Inside was the green gemstone she had just won at a steep price. The auction had been a refined yet fierce competition. Every facet of the gemstone had captured the attention and envy of numerous bidders. But in the end it was Victoria, known in the business world as the Iron Lady, who emerged victorious. Inside her sleek black car, Victoria sat in the back seat, gazing at the wooden box with satisfaction. Her assistant, Ethan Ross, sat in the front passenger seat and glanced back at the box with curiosity. Unable to hold back, he asked, "Miss Hayes, is this gemstone really that extraordinary?" Victoria smiled faintly and opened the box, allowing the gemstone's radiant green glow to illuminate the interior of the car. "You see, Ethan, this isn't just a gemstone. It's a piece of history. I didn't bid on it just to keep it for myself. I did it to show the world that Victoria Hayes has both vision and power." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Even so, it's probably a good idea to have it authenticated just to be safe. Spending that much money, we need to make sure it's the real deal." "Of course. I'm planning to take it in for testing tomorrow," Victoria replied, her voice filled with confidence. But an auction of this caliber wouldn't dare sell a fake. The following morning, as planned, Victoria brought the gemstone to the most reputable jewelry appraisal center in the city. The center was renowned for providing professional services to major corporations and private collectors, and its reputation was spotless. She was greeted by Daniel Wallace, a sharp-eyed middle-aged man wearing gold-rimmed glasses. His demeanor was calm yet meticulous. "Miss Hayes, is this the gemstone you'd like us to appraise?" Daniel asked as he carefully took the wooden box from her hands. Opening it, his eyes widened slightly before he regained his professional composure. Daniel placed the gemstone under specialized equipment and began his examination. He used magnifying lenses and a variety of tools, scrutinizing every detail. His expression shifted from focused to grave. Finally, he set his tools down, looked up at Victoria, and said hesitantly, "Miss Hayes, I need to inform you, this gemstone is not a natural emerald. It's an artificial replica." Victoria blinked, momentarily stunned. Her brows furrowed slightly as she responded, "Mr. Wallace, are you absolutely certain? This was purchased at an auction, and it came with all the proper certificates." "I understand your concern," Daniel replied, his tone reassuring yet firm. "But based on my analysis, the composition and craftsmanship of this gemstone show clear signs of synthetic production." He handed her a preliminary report. "If you'd like, I can prepare a more detailed appraisal." Victoria was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, please do. I'd like a full report." As Daniel got to work on the report, Victoria sat nearby, scrolling through photos from the previous night's auction on her phone. A sense of unease crept over her. The gemstone displayed at the auction had been dazzling. How could it be a fake? When Daniel finished, he handed her the completed report. "Miss Hayes, here's my appraisal report. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me." Victoria took the report and gave him a small, polite smile. "Thank you, Mr. Wallace. I'll take care of this." After leaving the appraisal center, Victoria returned to her car and handed the report to Ethan. "It seems the auction may have made a serious mistake. Organize this report and draft a press statement. We can't let this slide." Ethan skimmed through the report, his eyes widening. A fake? How could an auction like that let something like this happen? "Whether it was deliberate or accidental, it's inexcusable," Victoria said, her tone resolute. "I'll make sure they give me an explanation." That afternoon, Victoria carefully repackaged the gemstone, attaching the appraisal report along with a strongly worded letter. She recorded the entire process and arranged for a specialized courier to pick up the package and return it to the auction house. At the same time, she instructed Ethan to contact the media and prepare to expose the situation publicly. The next day, several prominent media outlets covered the story with eye-catching headlines. "Prestigious auction house accused of selling counterfeit gemstone. Business mogul Victoria Hayes outraged." The articles detailed the events, including the appraisal report that Victoria had provided. The auction house was quick to respond, holding a press conference to address the allegations. They claimed that the gemstone they had sold was not the same as the one returned by Victoria. According to their records, the gemstone they had received was a yellow stone, not the green emerald originally auctioned. They provided logistics and surveillance footage, insisting that the gemstone was in perfect condition when handed over to Victoria. We have full surveillance evidence proving that the green gemstone was delivered to Ms. Hayes intact, the auction house's spokesperson, Robert Miller, stated firmly. We suspect that the gemstone was switched at some point after the handover. This statement deepened the mystery, as both sides stood their ground, and public opinion quickly spiraled. Some believed the auction house was at fault, while others speculated that Victoria might have been attempting to deceive them. In response to the auction house's claims, Victoria calmly addressed the media. The gemstone I returned is the exact same one I received from the auction. It was accompanied by the appraisal report confirming it as synthetic. As for the yellow stone they are claiming, I have no idea what that is. The controversy quickly became a hot topic in both social circles and media outlets, with the dispute between Victoria and the auction house at its center. To alleviate the growing pressure from public scrutiny, local law enforcement stepped in to investigate. The case was assigned to Detective Michael Carter, a seasoned investigator known for his meticulous and methodical approach. Detective Carter wasted no time. His first move was to meet with representatives from the auction house to gather information. Robert Miller, the spokesperson who had been handling the media storm, greeted him with a mix of professionalism and fatigue. Detective Carter, all of our procedures are transparent and above board, Robert said as he flipped through documents spread out on the table. Here is the complete record of the green gemstone, from its display at the auction to its packaging and delivery. Every step was documented on camera. Carter nodded and took the documents, his tone calm but firm. I'll also need to review all of your surveillance footage. I'll verify each step myself. Robert immediately contacted the technical team to retrieve the footage. Carter sat in the auction house's conference room and began reviewing the video. The footage showed the green gemstone on display during the auction, sparkling under the lights and captivating bidders. After Victoria won the bid, the staff meticulously packaged the gemstone into a wooden box, sealed it, and handed it over to her assistant, Ethan. So far, your process seems airtight, Carter remarked as he paused the video. Now, do you have any records of the yellow stone you claim to have received? Robert nodded and handed him another file. This includes footage and logs of the package arriving at our facility. As you can see, the package was delivered to us in perfect condition, but when opened, it contained a yellow gemstone instead of the green one. Carter flipped through the records and watched the video. The footage showed a courier delivering the package to the auction house. The staff signed for it, and upon opening the box, they indeed found a yellow gemstone instead of the original green emerald. Robert's explanation left Carter with more questions than answers. Next, Detective Michael Carter made his way to Victoria Hayes's office to speak directly with the businesswoman at the center of the controversy. Detective Carter, I'm glad you're here. Victoria greeted him with her usual composed and straightforward demeanor. She set down her coffee cup and gestured for him to take a seat. This situation has been a major headache for me. I refuse to tolerate being falsely accused. Ms. Hayes, I understand your frustration, Carter said evenly. In order to ensure a thorough investigation, I need to hear your account of the events, from the moment you received the gemstone at the auction to the time it was sent back. I'll also need to review any related documents, including the shipping receipts for the package you returned to the auction house. Victoria didn't hesitate. She called her assistant, Ethan, to bring in all the necessary records. Carter quickly went through the shipping documentation and noted that the package had been sent from Victoria's office address, routed through a logistics center, and eventually delivered to the auction house. I also have video evidence of the appraisal process, Victoria added, handing Carter her phone. She played a video from the day she brought the gemstone to the appraisal center. In the footage, Victoria could be seen handing the wooden box to Daniel Wallace, the appraiser. He opened the box, examined the green gemstone under a magnifying lens, and eventually declared it to be a synthetic counterfeit. The video also showed him returning the gemstone to the wooden box and handing it back to Victoria. Carter carefully watched the entire recording, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. According to the auction house's records, the green gemstone was authentic when it was handed over to Victoria. The footage from the appraisal center clearly showed that the gemstone Victoria brought was also green. Yet the one returned to the auction house was a yellow gemstone. There appeared to be a gap in the chain of events, but where exactly had things gone wrong? Miss Hayes, when did you send the gemstone back to the auction house? Carter asked. The day after I received the appraisal report, Victoria replied. I was furious when I found out it wasn't authentic, so I had Ethan arrange for the package to be shipped immediately. Carter nodded thoughtfully. Thank you for your cooperation. My next step is to gather detailed records from the logistics company and see if anything unusual occurred during transportation. Victoria's expression remained calm and resolute. Detective, I hope you'll get to the bottom of this and clear my name. Carter rose to his feet and left Victoria's office, his mind piecing together the fragments of information. This case seemed straightforward on the surface, but the deeper he delved, the more apparent it became that something didn't add up. The auction house's records, Victoria's account, and the logistics process all appeared consistent. Yet there were subtle contradictions that hinted at a larger mystery. Returning to the station, Carter immediately requested detailed records from the logistics company. His instincts told him that the package's journey might hold the key to unraveling the truth. The next day, Carter visited the logistics company, which specialized in handling high-value and sensitive items. He reviewed their surveillance footage and system data. To his surprise, he discovered that the package had remained unattended at the logistics center for over 3 hours, an unusual delay that didn't match the expected timeline. This doesn't look right, Carter muttered as he closely examined the footage. He rewound the video to the period when the package was left in the handling area. Unlike other packages that were quickly processed, Victoria's package had been set aside for an extended period until a temporary worker finally handled it. Zooming in, Carter noted the face of the worker and took a screenshot. He then contacted the logistics company manager and requested the worker's information. Detective Carter, the individual in question is a part-time employee named Anthony Grant, the manager explained as he handed over a file. Detective Carter reviewed the file on Anthony Grant, his brows furrowing slightly. Anthony was in his mid-30s, and his work record appeared ordinary at first glance. However, a quick search through police databases revealed a series of recent small loan applications under Anthony's name, raising Carter's suspicions. He decided to visit Anthony in person to see if he could uncover more information. That evening, Carter found Anthony living in a rundown apartment in a quiet part of the city. The man looked disheveled and anxious as he opened the door to find a detective standing on his doorstep. Anthony Grant, I'm Detective Carter. I'm investigating a case related to your work at the logistics company. I'd appreciate your cooperation in answering a few questions. Carter's tone was calm, but his presence was firm and commanding. I don't know what this is about, Anthony stammered, avoiding eye contact. Carter didn't relent. You recently handled a package that was being sent to an auction house, a high-value item. Do you recall it? Anthony froze for a moment, then shook his head. I handle so many packages every day, Detective. How would I remember one specific package? Carter pulled out a screenshot from the surveillance footage and showed it to him. The image clearly captured Anthony taking the package and walking into a room at the logistics center. This footage shows you handling the package in question. After taking it, you entered a specific room and stayed there for some time. Care to explain what happened during that period? Anthony's hands began to tremble slightly, and he lowered his head, silent for a moment. Finally, he muttered, I was just doing my job. I don't know anything about what happened to the package. Carter's gaze sharpened. Did someone give you instructions? You should know I can access additional footage from inside the room you entered. If there's anything you're hiding, now is the time to come clean. Anthony's eyes widened slightly, and he glanced nervously around the room. He didn't know Carter was bluffing. There were no cameras inside the room, but the detective's calculated gamble paid off. Anthony finally broke. All right, Anthony exclaimed, raising his hands. I'll tell you everything, but you have to promise to help me. Go on, Carter said firmly. If you cooperate fully, I'll note it in my report. Anthony swallowed hard before speaking. That day, I got a call from an anonymous number. The person on the other end told me that a valuable gemstone would be passing through the logistics center. They offered me money to swap the gemstone inside the package with a fake one. All I had to do was deliver the real one to a specific location. Who was the person who called you? Carter asked, his tone pressing. I don't know, Anthony admitted, his voice shaky. They didn't give me a name. They just told me to leave the gemstone at a jewelry store downtown, and the payment would be wired to my account afterward. What was the address of this jewelry store? Carter demanded. Anthony provided the address, which Carter immediately recognized. It was the same appraisal center where Victoria Hayes had taken the green gemstone for evaluation. This revelation set off alarm bells in Carter's mind. He began to suspect that Daniel Wallace, the appraiser, might not be as innocent as he appeared. Carter wasted no time and started looking into Wallace's background. His investigation revealed a disturbing lead. A confidential informant familiar with the underground jewelry trade disclosed that Wallace had connections to black market dealers. Although his reputation in the legitimate jewelry world was impeccable, rumors suggested that he frequently facilitated the sale of stolen or counterfeit gems on the black market. Wallace is smart, the informant explained. He keeps his public image spotless, but behind closed doors, he's deeply involved in the illegal gem trade. In fact, I heard he recently acquired a green emerald that he's planning to sell at a premium. Carter began piecing the puzzle together. The evidence increasingly pointed to Wallace as a key player in the scheme. The detective now suspected that Wallace had orchestrated the gemstone swap, using Anthony as a pawn to secure the real emerald for himself. Determined to get to the bottom of the case, Carter decided it was time to confront Wallace directly. He prepared for a covert operation, disguising himself as a customer to avoid alerting Wallace to his suspicions. With his team on standby, Carter headed to the appraisal center, ready to uncover the truth. Detective Carter arrived at the appraisal center later that afternoon, dressed in plain clothes to avoid drawing attention. As he stepped inside, the air was quiet and sterile, filled with the faint scent of polished wood and metal. Daniel Wallace stood behind the counter, peering through a magnifying lens at a diamond ring. He looked up as Carter approached, his face lighting up with a polite smile. "Good afternoon," Wallace greeted warmly. "How can I help you today?" Carter's tone was casual but calculated. "Mr. Wallace, I'm interested in learning more about gemstones, particularly emeralds. I heard you're the best in the business." Wallace chuckled modestly, removing his magnifying lens and setting the ring aside. "I try my best. Are you looking to appraise a piece or perhaps make a purchase?" "I'm here for information, actually," Carter replied, leaning casually against the counter. "I've been hearing some fascinating stories about rare emeralds. One in particular caught my attention, the green emerald from the Hayes auction. I believe you evaluated it recently." Wallace's smile faltered for just a second before he regained his composure. "Ah yes, that was quite an impressive piece. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a synthetic gemstone. A shame, really." Carter nodded, keeping his tone light. "It must have been disappointing for Ms. Hayes. But I have to say, it's interesting how gemstones like that can disappear and reappear in surprising places. For instance," Carter slid a photograph across the counter, an image of Wallace leaving a known black market gem exchange with a green gemstone in his hand. "I found this very curious." Wallace froze, his hand hovering over the photograph. His expression shifted from composed to visibly unsettled. "I don't know what you're implying," he said cautiously. "I've never been involved in anything illegal." Carter leaned in slightly, his voice calm but firm. "The evidence says otherwise, Mr. Wallace. We've traced a green emerald from the Hayes auction, through the logistics system, and back to your appraisal center. Now we have testimony from a logistics worker stating that the gemstone was swapped on its way here. Care to explain how that emerald ended up in your possession?" Wallace's forehead began to glisten with sweat. "Detective, I can assure you everything I do here is above board. That emerald must have come to me through entirely legitimate means." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Legitimate? Because what I see here," he tapped the photograph, "is you leaving a black market gem exchange. And according to a confidential informant, you've been trying to sell that very emerald for a hefty profit. So I'll ask you again, How did you acquire the gemstone? Wallace's confidence cracked. His voice became defensive. Fine, I'll admit it. I acquired the emerald from a private party. They assured me it was legitimate, and I had no reason to question them. Carter's voice turned icy. A private party? Was this party the same person who arranged for the logistics worker to swap the package? Because as it stands, you're looking at charges for fraud, conspiracy, and illegal trade. Wallace swallowed hard, realizing he was cornered. Finally, he slumped back and muttered, "All right. Yes, I knew the gemstone wasn't clean. Someone contacted me, saying they had a rare emerald to sell. I didn't ask questions. I figured if I authenticated it and sold it discreetly, no one would know." "And who was this person?" Carter pressed. "I don't know," Wallace admitted, his voice trembling. "It was all done anonymously. They said the emerald was a one-time opportunity, and I didn't want to lose out." Carter sighed, standing upright. "Mr. Wallace, you've just confessed to participating in a criminal operation. I hope you realize the consequences of your actions." Wallace nodded miserably. "I'll cooperate. Just please go easy on me." Carter signaled to his team, who entered the appraisal center and took Wallace into custody. As Wallace was escorted out, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, an invisible hand pulling the strings. Back at the station, Carter began reviewing the case in full. It all seemed to point to Wallace as the orchestrator of the swap. Yet something felt off. Late that night, while going through the seized documents from Wallace's black market dealings, Carter uncovered a name that made his pulse quicken: Victoria Hayes. According to the records, Victoria had been listed as a previous owner of another high-value gemstone that had been sold through black market channels years ago. The revelation struck Carter like a thunderbolt. Could Victoria have a deeper connection to this case than she was letting on? Carter spent the rest of the night piecing together every detail. The next morning, with his theory in mind, he decided to confront Victoria once more, this time off the record. The next day, Detective Carter arrived at Victoria Hayes's office unannounced. Without an appointment, he waited patiently in the reception area before being ushered into her spacious, meticulously designed office. Victoria was on a call, speaking in her usual calm and commanding tone. When she noticed Carter, she ended the call and turned to greet him. "Detective Carter," Victoria said with a polite smile. "This is unexpected. Has there been a new development in the case?" Carter sat down across from her, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hayes, I believe I've pieced together the full picture of what happened." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression neutral but intrigued. "Oh? I thought the case was already resolved. If there's more to the story, I'd love to hear it." Carter's tone sharpened slightly. "The emerald from the auction was real. The gemstone you brought to the appraisal center, however, was a fake." Victoria raised an eyebrow but maintained her composure. "Detective, that sounds contradictory. Didn't the evidence prove that Daniel Wallace had swapped the gemstone?" Carter nodded slightly. "Yes, Wallace played his part. But before I explain further, let me share something else we uncovered. Years ago, you owned another high-value gemstone that was reported stolen. That same gemstone later appeared in Wallace's black market dealings." Victoria's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. "Yes, I remember that. It was an unfortunate loss, and the police never recovered it." Carter leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Here's what I think happened. You recognize that Wallace wasn't just a legitimate appraiser, but also had deep ties to the black market. At some point, you discovered that the stolen gemstone had passed through his hands. That must have infuriated you. So you devised a plan to expose him and make him pay." Victoria's lips curved into a faint smile. "Detective, that's quite a story. Do you have any evidence to back it up?" Carter ignored the remark and pressed on. "At the auction, you won the real emerald, but you swapped it for a fake before taking it to Wallace for appraisal. You knew he'd declare it synthetic, setting the stage for your next move. The real emerald was then sent back to the auction house, but you ensured it would be intercepted during transit. The logistics worker was manipulated into switching the package under Wallace's instructions, or so he thought. In reality, you were the one pulling the strings all along." Victoria's smile widened slightly, but she said nothing. Carter continued, his voice steady. This elaborate setup allowed you to play the victim while implicating Wallace in a fraudulent scheme. By the time we arrested him, his reputation was destroyed, and you emerged as a wronged businesswoman. But in the end, it was all part of your plan. The room fell silent. Victoria picked up her coffee cup, taking a slow sip before speaking. Detective Carter, that's an interesting theory. But it's just that, a theory. Without concrete evidence, it's nothing more than a story. Carter stood, adjusting his jacket. You're right. I don't have direct evidence to prove any of this. The case is officially closed, and Wallace is in custody for his black market dealings. But I came here today as a man seeking answers, not as a detective filing charges. Victoria stood as well, walking him to the door. Her voice was calm, almost playful. Detective, I appreciate your curiosity, but sometimes it's best to accept things as they appear. As Carter stepped out of her office, he turned back briefly. One last thing, Miss Hayes. If you were behind all of this, it was a brilliantly executed plan. But even the smartest plans have a way of unraveling eventually. Victoria smiled, her expression unreadable. I'll take that as a compliment. Have a good day, detective. As Carter walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd only scratched the surface of Victoria's true intentions. Watching him leave from her office window, Victoria sipped her coffee and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Everything had gone exactly as she had planned. The green emerald sat in a secure vault, back where it belonged,